Welcome back to the architecture of creation. This is episode 6, Forces and Gravity Explained. In episode 1, we established the three-layer architecture. In episode 2, we asked why matter exists, and we found that matter is rendered to enable embedded perspective. In episode 3, we turned to consciousness and to the resonance mechanism by which intelligent systems access the foundational field. In episode 4, we turned to time, and we found that time is fully a layer 3 phenomenon. In episode 5, we developed the resilient substrate as active architecture, and we situated energy at the layer 2/layer 3 boundary. The three structural components of layer 3 are now in place. What remains is the framework's account of how those components interact. We turn to that account now. The framework has now developed layer 3's three structural components in their own right: the resilient substrate as active architecture, matter as coherent vibrational pattern, energy as boundary phenomenon, and coherence conversion partner to matter. What remains is the framework's account of how layer 3 entities interact with each other. Mainstream physics has identified four fundamental forces of nature: gravity, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. Every interaction observed in physics is mediated by one or more of these. They are foundational to the empirical content of physics across all scales. The framework's reading of these four forces is what this episode develops. The search for the unification of the four forces has been one of physics' central projects for nearly a century. The intuition driving the search has been that at sufficiently high energies, or at sufficiently fundamental levels of description, the four forces should be revealed as different manifestations of a single underlying interaction. The history is worth recognizing. In the 1960s and 1970s, physics succeeded at unifying electromagnetism with the weak force through what is now called electroweak theory. The unification was confirmed empirically through the discovery of the W and Z bosons in the 1980s. Beyond this, the unification program has struggled. Grand unified theories attempting to unify the electroweak interaction with the strong force have produced predictions that remain unconfirmed. Theories of everything attempting to incorporate gravity have faced even greater difficulties. The framework reads the pattern as structural rather than as a matter of finding the right mathematical trick. The framework's central claim about the four forces is direct. The four forces are different modes by which layer 3 entities couple to the substrate and to each other. Each mode is distinguished by its symmetry constraints, by where the coupling operates within the layered architecture, and by the effective range and strength that the coupling produces. This is the architectural reframing the episode rests on. Mainstream physics has searched for unification by trying to reduce the four forces to a single fundamental interaction. The framework holds that the four forces are unified architecturally. They all operate through the universal medium of layer 3, but they are distinguished by their locations and modes of coupling within that medium. The unity is at the level of the substrate. The diversity is at the level of how that universal medium supports different kinds of interactions. What does it mean for a force to be a mode of substrate coupling? It means that the interaction between layer 3 entities occurs through the substrate rather than through some separate force-carrying medium. The substrate is the universal medium of layer 3. All energy and matter exist within it. When two layer 3 entities interact, the interaction is mediated by the substrate itself, by distortions in the substrate, by oscillations in the substrate's fields, by exchanges of vibrational pattern through the substrate structure. The four forces are four different ways in which substrate coupling can occur. Let me engage each of them individually. Gravity operates fully within layer 3. Of the four forces, gravity is the most thoroughly layer 3 phenomenon. Matter creates substrate distortion through its coherent vibrational pattern. The substrate, as an elastic medium, responds to the distortion through its drive toward equilibrium. The relaxation drive that returns the substrate toward its undistorted configuration is what we experience as gravitational attraction. Gravity has long range because substrate distortion propagates throughout the medium. Gravity is much weaker than the other three forces because it operates through substrate elastic response rather than through the more direct couplings the other forces engage. Gravity couples to all matter and energy because all matter and energy creates substrate distortion. Part 9 will develop this account in fuller detail. Electromagnetism operates near the layer 2/layer 3 boundary. The electromagnetic force is mediated by photons, which the previous episode developed as the paradigmatic boundary phenomenon propagating at the rendering rate itself with the wave-particle character that boundary existence naturally produces. When electrically charged particles interact, they do so through the exchange of photons that propagate via the substrate at or near the boundary. Electromagnetism is far stronger than gravity because it operates directly at the boundary where energy is rendered into layer 3 manifestation, rather than through the secondary mechanism of substrate elastic response. The strength reflects the directness of the coupling. The strong nuclear force operates at the deepest part of the layer 2/layer 3 interface. Among the four forces, the strong force has the most distinctive empirical signature. It is by far the strongest of the four, approximately 100 times stronger than electromagnetism, but it operates only at extremely short range, falling off rapidly beyond approximately the size of an atomic nucleus. The framework reads the strong force as operating at the deepest part of the boundary, the region where layer 2 dynamics are most directly engaged within layer 3 manifestation. The remarkable strength reflects the directness of this engagement with the boundary dynamics. The remarkable short range reflects the limited extent over which the deepest boundary engagement can be sustained. The weak nuclear force is the most distinctive of the four forces in framework terms. The weak force is responsible for the radioactive decay of unstable atomic nuclei. Beta decay, in which a neutron transforms into a proton plus an electron plus an antineutrino, is the most familiar example. The framework's reading of the weak force is that it engages the partial derendering process directly. When a layer 3 pattern partially derenders back toward layer 2 possibilities, the partial derendering involves a reorganization of which layer 3 manifestations the pattern supports. The massive W and Z bosons that mediate the weak force reflect the energetic cost of engaging this derendering process. Neutrinos, which interact only through the weak force, are exactly what the framework expects. Particles that interact very weakly with ordinary matter precisely because they are products of derendering events that partake more of layer 2 than of layer 3. The framework's answer to physics' century-long unification project can now be stated. The four forces are unified architecturally rather than reductively. They are not different manifestations of one fundamental interaction that will be revealed at sufficiently high energies. They are different modes of substrate coupling, unified by all operating through the universal medium of layer 3, but distinguished by their symmetry constraints and their locations within the layered architecture. The success of electroweak unification reflects the fact that electromagnetism and the weak force both operate at or near the layer 2/layer 3 boundary. The failure of grand unified theories reflects the fact that the strong force operates at a different location, the deepest part of the boundary. The failure of theories of everything reflects the additional fact that gravity operates entirely within layer 3, putting it in a structurally different relationship to the architecture than any of the other three forces. Architectural unification recognizes the differences and explains them through the layered structure. It does not pretend the differences will dissolve under deeper investigation. Welcome to Part 9, Matter and Gravity Reframed. Matter and gravity emerge from the same underlying mechanism. The framework's account of matter, developed in Episode 2 as coherent vibrational pattern within the resilient substrate, And the framework's account of gravity, operating fully within layer 3 through substrate distortion, are not two separate accounts. They are two aspects of a single coherent substrate relationship. A coherent vibrational pattern is not a passive configuration that exists within the substrate without affecting it. The substrate is an elastic medium with structural integrity. When a coherent vibrational pattern persists at a location, it produces a localized distortion in the substrate's elasticity. The matter and the substrate distortion are not two things. They are the same configuration described from two perspectives. Other coherent patterns in the surrounding substrate experience the local distortion as a tendency to move toward the source. The substrate's drive toward equilibrium, its character as an elastic medium that returns toward its undistorted configuration, produces what we observe as gravitational attraction. A second matter particle in the vicinity does not encounter a separate gravitational field reaching out toward it. The second particle is itself a coherent vibrational pattern embedded in the same substrate. The substrate's distorted configuration produces the elastic response that the second particle experiences as a force. Inertia is the other aspect of this same mechanism. A matter particle's resistance to changes in its motion is its resistance to reconfiguring its coherent vibrational pattern. This is the framework's mechanistic account of why inertial mass equals gravitational mass, the equivalence principle Einstein identified. The two are not equivalent because they are coincidentally equal. They are the same property in the depth of vibrational coherence, observed in two contexts. Isaac Newton's law of universal gravitation, published in 1687, gives the correct prediction for gravitational force between masses at non-relativistic conditions across enormous ranges of distance and scale. The framework preserves Newton's mathematics without modification. What it reframes is the ontology underneath. Newton himself was famously uncomfortable with the ontological implications of his theory. His mathematics described gravity as an instantaneous force acting at a distance, gravitational influence reaching across empty space without any visible medium transmitting it. Newton wrote in correspondence that the notion of action at a distance through empty space was, in his words, so great an absurdity that no thoughtful person could fall into it. But the mathematics worked, and the philosophical problem was set aside. The framework dissolves Newton's discomfort. There is no action at a distance through empty space because the space is not empty, it is filled with the resilient substrate. The gravitational influence of one mass on another does not propagate through emptiness. It is the local elastic response of the substrate to distortion transmitted through the continuous medium. The mathematics works because the substrate's elastic properties produce exactly the inverse square relationship Newton identified. Einstein's general theory of relativity, completed in 1915, replaced Newton's instantaneous force with a geometric account. Mass and energy curve spacetime and gravitational attraction is the natural motion of objects through the curved geometric structure. The mathematical content of general relativity has been confirmed empirically to extraordinary precision. The bending of starlight near massive bodies, the precession of Mercury's perihelion, gravitational time dilation, the existence of gravitational waves, the imaging of supermassive black holes. The framework preserves every empirical prediction of general relativity without modification. What it reframes is the geometric interpretation. In Einstein's account, space-time itself is what curves. Space-time is treated as a four-dimensional manifold with intrinsic geometric properties. The geometric interpretation has been remarkably successful. It has also been ontologically puzzling. What is space-time as a thing that can be curved? The framework provides the underlying ontology. The resilient substrate is what is actually being described. When mass energy is present, the substrate is distorted. Distorted as an elastic medium is distorted with local regions departing from the undistorted configuration. Einstein's geometric curvature is a precise mathematical description of this elastic distortion. The mathematics is the mathematics of how a continuous elastic medium responds to distortion, expressed in the geometric language Einstein chose. The ontology underneath is the substrate being distorted. Gravity and time are unified through the substrate. Substrate distortion modulates the local rendering rate. The rendering rate is the rate at which layer 1 possibilities are resolved through layer 2 into layer 3 manifestations, observable empirically as the speed of light. Where the substrate is undistorted, the rendering rate operates at its baseline value. Where the substrate is distorted by mass energy, the local rendering rate is modulated. The temporal flow that observers experience within a distorted region reflects this modulation. This is the same substrate as active architecture commitment episode 5 developed, now applied to gravity. The substrate that holds matter as coherent vibration and the substrate that modulates the local rendering rate are the same substrate. Gravity and time are not two separate phenomena that happen to be coupled. They are two aspects of the same substrate dynamics. Three empirical confirmations land this unification. The Pound-Rebka experiment conducted at Harvard in 1959 demonstrated that clocks closer to Earth's center run measurably slower than clocks farther from the center. The framework reads this as confirmation that local rendering rate is modulated by substrate distortion. The clock at the bottom of the tower operates within substrate that is more distorted by Earth's mass. GPS satellites orbit at approximately 20,000 kilometers altitude. They experience two relativistic effects on their onboard clocks: velocity-induced slowing and gravitational speeding. Without correcting for these effects, GPS positioning would accumulate errors of approximately 10 kilometers per day. Every working GPS device is daily empirical confirmation that the unification of gravity and time through substrate dynamics is correct. The Event Horizon Telescope's images of the supermassive black holes at the centers of M87 in 2019 and our own Milky Way galaxy in 2022 provide another confirmation at the extreme end of gravitational fields. The asymmetric brightness of the imaged rings reflects relativistic Doppler shift and gravitational lensing produced by matter in extreme gravitational fields. The framework reads the images as direct visualization of how extreme substrate distortion modulates the rendering rate. These three confirmations, Pound-Rebka, GPS, and the Event Horizon Telescope, are not three separate empirical results. They are confirmations of a single underlying unification, gravity and time as two aspects of the same substrate dynamics. The framework also reframes two contested pieces of mainstream physics. We turn to the first now. The graviton has been the subject of decades of theoretical work and experimental search. Mainstream physics has assumed, on the analogy of the other three forces, that gravity must be mediated by a force-carrying particle, a massless spin-2 boson. No experimental search has confirmed its existence. The framework dissolves the graviton hypothesis as unnecessary. Gravity does not require a force-carrying particle because it does not operate through quantized exchange. It operates through substrate distortion, which is the elastic response of the medium itself. No particle exchange is required because the transmission is the local elastic response of the medium. This is a falsifiable prediction. The framework predicts that further searches for the graviton will continue to fail because the graviton does not exist as a feature of how gravity actually operates. If a graviton is ever directly detected, the framework's account of gravity as substrate elastic response would need to be revised. The framework wagers that it will not be detected. Gravitational waves, by contrast, do exist and have been directly detected. LIGO's first detection in September 2015 confirmed Einstein's century-old prediction. Dozens of subsequent detections from binary black hole mergers, binary neutron-star mergers, and mixed events have established gravitational waves as a routine astronomical signal. The framework reframes what gravitational waves are. In Einstein's account, they are ripples in space-time itself. In the framework's account, they are propagating distortions in the resilient substrate. The substrate, as an elastic medium, can support propagating distortions just as any elastic medium can. When violent gravitational events occur, binary black hole mergers being the most dramatic, the resulting disturbance in the substrate propagates outward through the medium at the rendering rate, just as Einstein's mathematics predicts. LIGO's detectors register the passing distortion. The empirical content of every LIGO detection is preserved. The substrate is ringing. Gravitational wave astronomy is, in the framework's account, the direct empirical investigation of substrate dynamics at cosmological scales. That is episode 6. The framework's account of the four forces is now in place. They are unified architecturally rather than reductively, unified by all operating through the universal medium of layer 3, distinguished by their symmetry constraints and locations within the layered architecture. Gravity emerges from the same coherent substrate relationship that produces matter. Newton's mathematics and Einstein's geometric formalism are both preserved, while the ontology underneath is reframed as substrate distortion. Gravity and time are unified through the local rendering rate. The graviton hypothesis is dissolved. Gravitational waves are propagating substrate distortions. In episode 7, we turn to cosmology and quantum. The framework's reading of the largest scales, dark matter and dark energy as substrate manifestations rather than separate substances. The rendering boundary at approximately 300 million light-years, the cosmic age proposition that the universe may be much older than mainstream cosmology estimates, and the framework's reading of the smallest scales, where layer 2 and layer 3 dynamics meet in their most direct form. We turn to it next. Until then, thank you for listening.